Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
What's up, guys? It's Darren. Welcome to the Touch MBA podcast. You know, the other month I was looking at the episodes we've done, and even though we've done over 100 of them, I realized that we hadn't done an episode focused on GMAT. Such an intimidating part of the application process, to some the most difficult part. So I wanted to do an episode on GMAT, and I thought about getting like a GMAT guru to come on the show to, give you guys some tips, like ways you could hack the GMAT. But I realized there's already a lot of online resources, whether that's the GMAT forums or, all the GMAT test prep providers have a lot of good content that you can find already. So I thought, let's go the other way and bring on admissions directors from top schools around the world to discuss how they look at your GMAT score. Because I think there's a lot of mystery surrounding how admissions committees view the GMAT score, how they use it, what they're looking for from which sections, whether it matters, whether you take the GMAT or GRE, whether your career goals matter or your nationality matters and how your score is evaluated. So to answer these tricky questions, I brought on 3 guests for this week's show. Son Nguyen, who's the Associate Director of Admissions for Michigan Ross in the US. Anjaney Borwankar, who is Regional Director of IESE Business School, Southeast Asia, and a member of the full-time MBA Admissions Committee. ESA is based in Spain. And Gary Lowe, who is the Head of Marketing and Admissions for the MBA program at HKUST. And HKUST is based in Hong Kong. And I spent about 15 minutes with each of these admissions directors, and I think it's really informative to see behind the scenes what they're looking at and how they use the score and how that score fits into their program and admissions philosophy. And I asked similar questions to all 3 guests, but that was intentional to let you see that each school uses the GMAT in a slightly different way. If you stick around to the end of the podcast, you can hear my conclusions and recommendations based on what I learned from these 3 conversations. And while we're at it, how about a GMAT fact? Did you know that the average GMAT score for Vietnamese test takers is actually higher than the average GMAT score from US test takers? I couldn't believe it when I saw that. Obviously, taking a test like the GMAT in your second language is super difficult, but there it is. Yeah, Vietnamese GMAT average is higher than the US GMAT average. And if you're interested in seeing what the average score is at your country, go check out touchmba.com/GMAT. There I have the show notes for this episode and a list to all the resources mentioned by the guests on the show, whether that's the GRE to GMAT converter or a report that has the average scores, GMAT scores for the past 5 years for your country. Go check that out. As always, remember that at Touch MBA, we offer free school selection help. That's where we really want to make a dent in the MBA universe, is in helping you quickly kind of assess your competitiveness at your target schools and get some recommendations based on your goals and your profile on which schools might fit you best. Give you a jump start in that whole school selection process. So you could check that out at touchmba.com. And finally, I'm excited to announce that we have a sponsor for the show. When 3 MBAs struggled with student loans, they knew there had to be a better way, so they created one. Now, CommonBond is a leading student lender, saving members up to $13,000 on MBA loans. Learn more at commonbond.co/touchmba. CommonBond Lending LLC, NMLS number 1175900. So yeah, really excited to have CommonBond on as a sponsor, as I feel they're really helping a lot of MBA students save money and frustration with their student loans. So definitely go check them out. And now let's bring on our first guest, Son Nguyen, who's the Associate Director of Admissions for the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business MBA program. Here we go. Tough questions on the GMAT answered. Part 1. Son, thanks for your time and thanks for hopping on the pod again. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's always great to be back with you, Darren.
So I'd first like to start this talk on the GMAT with how do you at Michigan Ross actually use the GMAT in your admissions process? How do you actually use this data point?
So, for us, it's definitely a concern and a question that candidates have. They look at the admissions black box and they wonder if Ross or other U.S. schools have this equation. And for us, we really do believe in holistic review. We don't give certain point system. There's no actual formula, like the quadratic equation. It's only one piece of the equation, but it is an important piece for us. We're one of those places that looks at the GMAT as, I would say something that everybody theoretically takes. The other thing are also very important. The academic, professional, personal experiences factor in. But for us, GMAT, it does matter. I think if someone is at the very, very low end of our middle 80 percentile, it's going to be a bigger challenge for them. And if someone's at the higher end of the GMAT percentile, it also is going to take a lot of work, whether it comes from full-time work experience or compelling essays and letters of recommendation. So it's not just a be-all, end-all, but it is a piece, and it is an important piece. Yeah,
no, and it's refreshing to hear that, because I think sometimes schools aren't very straightforward, about how important the GMAT is. I mean, in terms of the sections of the GMAT itself, are you more concerned with the overall score, verbal score, quant score, IR score, AWA? Like, how do those all factor in?
For us here at Ross, I think the overall score will be the most important thing. Within that breakdown, though, we probably skew towards having quant be more important, just because we do consider our curriculum to be very quant heavy. We do a lot of action-based and experiential learning, and so we're going to trust that most students are going to be able to handle the verbal team aspect of it, the writing portion. So it's really going to be the quant that comes at you pretty fast here. So academically we jump right in. So people are going to be having some pretty hardcore stats work right away, and accounting and finance, those are all variable depending on what your back experience is. But quant does give us a little bit, it can ease our burden, at least in terms of student ability, a little bit. In terms of the other sections, verbal matters. I think IR, we looked at it a little bit more recently. And then with the IR section, it's mostly with outliers, right? So if you're kind of in the mid-range, no big deal. But if we see something that's very, very low, we might question it. And if we see something that's pretty high and strong, again, not that it would matter too much, but anything at that point could help you in the process.
Got it. And given that you do focus, on that quant score, and that is important to you guys, are you looking for like a minimum percentage? Like, do you guys have some sort of baseline, like 70th percentile or 60th percentile that you're looking for? Or will that also kind of adjust based on the student's profile?
It really does adjust in the student profile. And I'm happy and open to say that. I know that some schools kind of have a cutoff with percentile, whether it's the GMAT or the GRE. For us, we don't. I think it's going back to holistic review, right? So if your GMAT, a portion of it isn't quite where you want it to be, we can look back on your work experience. Like, let's say the quant's strong, but it's not top 99th percentile. We're going to look at your work history. So let's say you've done some really strong big data work, you've done some very quant heavy work. You could be in consulting or banking. That can help complement your overall application package.
And I mean, kind of on that note, are applicants' educational histories and backgrounds also factored into what you're looking for in different parts of the GMAT?
Yeah, it is factored in. 2 points. So one, for us, we'll see someone that, let's say, majored in engineering or has worked in a very science and tech heavy field where they're doing a lot of quant work. That can obviously work as another piece that could complement their GRE score. But the other note I would actually say when it comes to that is probably on the recruiting side. So we have students that may score a little bit lower or a little bit higher or not take a GMAT and then opt for the GRE. In that case, it can matter if they're going into consulting or iBanking. I'm sure you probably tell students that too. But for us, that's kind of where we don't try to make too many harsh judgments. Like, let's say if someone has a GMAT they're coming in with and they're already in our range overall, we're going to believe that they're going to be able to do the work and hustle and work for the recruiting opportunities. So we won't judge them too harshly on the output side. We're going to actually believe in the product we have here and the education and the career services and the other students helping the students out.
Yeah. So are you saying that some of the recruiting firms, like in consulting and banking, they would prefer a GMAT score over a GRE score? I just want to make sure I understood you clearly there. Yeah.
I think nothing officially from what I've heard, but I think anecdotally, it's almost always been a GMAT thing. And so I think as more schools take on the GRE and allow that as a test, we're slowly trying to warm up the banks and the consulting firms to be okay with GRE scores and feel more comfortable. I think one of the other big things in the U.S., a little bit off subject, is Harvard's law school is now going to take the GRE in addition to taking the LSAT, or either or. And so for us, we've been taking the GRE for business school for a couple of years, mostly as a service for dual degrees, but now we take it as a standalone as well. But I think from a personal side, I still do think that the GMAT, when it comes to consulting and banking recruiting, is going to be probably a little more helpful unless you knock out the GRE and do well overall with your grades in MBA.
I mean, back in my day, makes me sound like I'm like 100 years old or something. But back when I used to be an admissions director, 700 was kind of a cutoff point for the top consulting firms and to some of the top banking companies. Is that similar like these days?
Yeah, I think that's still pretty fair. I'm actually going to go meet with some of our recruiting advisory board this afternoon and can follow up with you a little bit. But that's still kind of what I'm hearing across the board, not just with recruiters here at Michigan Ross, but with some of our recruiting friends at other universities too.
Great. And how do you feel about retakes? What's kind of your spiel with applicants when they ask, maybe I have like a 680, so I'm a little bit below your average, should I retake?
Yeah, no, we're very, very pro retake here at Ross. I think it kind of comes from maybe a little bit of our Midwestern mentality. Maybe it comes from just us appreciating people that can go out there and hustle and grind and be resilient and do the work. And so we don't mind if someone takes the GMAT 2 or 3 times. That's not an issue for us at all. We don't do an average. We're just going to take your best overall sitting. I can tell you as one of our associate directors here that reads a lot of our applications, I don't really look at the floor on your score. I really do go through and give you the benefit of the doubt. So if you've taken it 3 times or even 4 times, no big deal. I'm always going to take your best overall score. I don't say, they went from a 610 to a 740. That 610 doesn't even really register in my mind. I go straight to that 740, 700, 720, wherever that range may be. I just look at their best overall performance and use that in my evaluation of their application. With that said, I do have a fun fact when it comes to GMAT retakes. Most of our students, probably take it 2-3 times. It's not uncommon for me to see someone take it for our all-time record that I've seen since I've been here at Ross. Is I've seen a candidate take the GMAT 16 times.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Is that even possible?
Well, I mean, I saw 16 scores on their score sheet. So
is that a printer error or something? That's crazy.
I saw all the dates, and it was through a lot of years. And I would encourage people not to try to break the record. I think stay away from that, and you guys will be all right.
Well, that person clearly had the desire, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can't teach that. Actually, on that note, do you treat, for example, applicants from different countries? Like, is there kind of a different GMAT scale for them? Because some countries obviously have higher average scores than other countries.
Yeah. So I think big picture, regardless of what country you're coming from, you're going to be in play if you're, in our middle 80% and higher, kind of in that mid-range and up. And, you're going to at least have that opportunity to be in the ball game. I would say that yeah, quite frankly, the international pool itself is pretty competitive among different countries. Like our three most popular countries in terms of numbers of application tend to be India, China, and Brazil, with usually, Korea, Japan right up there as well. And so, when we look at how we build the class, right, I think if we wanted to concentrate purely on GMAT, we could fill the entire class with our international students easily, right? And so, to be totally candid, yeah, I think that a lot of times the students will be competing within their pool, and as a result, our Indian students and our Chinese students do score very, very high and do a great job with their GMAT. So it really depends on how you stand out there, right? So yeah, it's going to mean a higher GMAT, but it's also going to mean strong work experience and impact upon what they've done, and a good history of what they've done outside the work, and obviously fit with the Ross culture too, and learning style and how they fit in student culture.
I saw in the latest 2018 US News rankings, I was just looking at the average GMAT scores, and oh my gosh, I couldn't believe it. They were so incredibly high, like 730 plus, 720 plus. And I noticed that Ross had, very strong, don't get me wrong, like 708 average. But compared to other MBA programs in your same league, it's a little bit lower, right? And I was wondering if that's an intentional thing, that you guys are looking for other things outside the GMAT, or just kind of wanted to know if that was random or maybe represented something.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's totally random. One of the things that I'm really honestly pleased about being an outsider to Michigan, being that I went to Notre Dame for undergrad and then Columbia for grad school, and I've worked throughout the world, is we believe a lot in diversity. Diversity of experience, diversity of background, diversity of thought. And so that's kind of where the GMAT can or may not come into play, right? So if someone comes to us and is able to bring this incredibly strong history, whether it's in terms of accomplishments or work experience, it's something that we're able to play on. We also do have a really nice number of dual degrees. When you're at the University of Michigan, you do have students from, I think 100 top 10 programs from throughout the whole university. And so you have access to a lot of different scholars. And with that comes percentages of GRE takers, or even that sliding GMAT too. So, I don't want to say that we're going to concentrate on the GMAT too much, but I do anticipate that as our pool has gotten stronger the last 3 years, that GMAT will continue to go up. But we don't purposely hold it down for any reason. It's just that we really do look at how our applicant pool works every year, and we're not going to try to artificially inflate the GMAT just to have our higher GMAT. We're trying to use the pool the best we can to bring in a really strong class of about 400, maybe a little over 400 students each year.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate that. And any last advice about the GMAT that you have for our listeners?
For us, I think it's important to let us know that you're taking it. If you're going to take it again, give us the date ahead of time. And for me personally, I know that there's this new thing where you can cancel all your old scores or not show us your scores.
That's right.
And for me, it's actually important for me to know your GMAT history, because maybe you're not proud of that 650, and then you jump to 720. But for me, it's a good data point, because that shows that you've already taken it an additional time. And a better example is, let's say you scored exactly at our average. Let's say you're at 710, right? And maybe you have some other pieces of your application that could be better, but you're right around average all around. But there's one or two compelling pieces that I really, really like, and I only see you took the GMAT once. I'm going to wonder why. But let's say you've already taken it 3 other times, and you went from 650 to 670 to 710. That's actually going to be a piece that I want to know, because that can help you. That can say, this person's committed time and effort to taking the GMAT multiple times, and maybe they have maxed out, and this is what I'm going to have. So I got to make this decision on what I have, versus us only seeing that 710. I might wonder, do they have a better test on them? Should I maybe hold off, or should I do something different? So give us those data points. Give us, all the information that's out there. I know that students are really afraid, especially our Asian students. They want to package this perfect application, but life's not perfect. It's okay for us to see everything you've done, because that really formulates who you are as a student, as a person. So don't be afraid.
That's awesome advice, Son. Thank you so much for sharing that. And as always, great to have you on the podcast.
You got it. All right. I'll catch up with you next time.
So yeah, that was Son Nguyen from the Michigan Ross MBA, just sharing, very frank, honest insights into how he and the Ross admissions team evaluates your GMAT. Let's go straight to our next guest, Anjaney Borwankar from the IESE MBA program in Spain, one of the top programs in Europe and really well known for their case study pedagogy. Anjan, thank you so much for jumping back on the podcast. The first question I had for you about the GMAT is, how does IESE look at the GMAT as a data point when considering, an applicant's profile?
Yeah, Darren, thanks again for having me and great to reconnect with you. So you mentioned some keywords here. So the GMAT for us is another data point, okay? It's important, but it's not the entire picture of the candidate. So the first message I want to give anyone listening to this podcast is, at least for IESE Business School, it's quite important that the person who's looking at the school understands what this school is about and doesn't overemphasize on the GMAT itself. Okay, so the GMAT is important, but it's not the whole picture. Because I've seen a lot of people just taking the GMAT again and again and again and bettering their score, but then at the interview, they just don't know why they are applying to us. Okay, and so you've got to put the horse before the cart. That's very important, not the other way around. So how do we look at it? That was your question, and it's a longish response, but bear with me and feel free to cut me in case I'm going off track. But here, like I said, it's an individual that's applying to the school. We're looking for a fit to the program. And what the GMAT tells us, it's a universal test, it's a universal score that allows us to do some sort of a comparison with other potential candidates to the program, right? So imagine now, I'll take a specific example. Imagine someone who has a strong engineering background. Now, if that person has a strong engineering background, and let's say the work experience is also in a technical area, we can assume to a large extent that this person is familiar with mathematics, is comfortable with numbers, etc. So now, when we look at the GMAT, and let's say this person has a high GMAT, okay, but that the strength of the GMAT, the composition of the GMAT, the main part where this person has done well is the math section. It doesn't tell me anything extra about the candidate, okay? So for this particular candidate, I'll be actually paying closer attention to the other sections, the verbal. I'll be looking at their AWA, their IR, to get a bit more evidence that this guy is not just very comfortable with numbers, but can actually, write well and can think properly. Okay, so that's the way we look at it. And the reverse will apply also. Let's say there's a journalist who applies to our program. And again, the attention will go really to the maths part, right? Because again, we do not see evidence of that from the natural, course of her experience, right? So that's the way we look at it. It's not the overall score, it's really the composition and applied to that particular individual. So I'll leave it at that, but I can get into more details if you want.
No, that's really helpful. And I mean, do you really look at the AWA and IR scores as well?
Yes, we do look at that. That score, of course, is submitted to us, so we pay attention to that as well. Again, no one parameter is kind of overall important. I wouldn't say that. And like I said, it's not the overall number, but it's really the composition. So the IR, AWA, we will pay more attention if let's say we have doubts on this person's critical thinking. Okay, we haven't seen enough evidence of that, or in the essay we don't see a proper, well-constructed essay. Then we want to pay attention to the AWA and the IR just to see, is there other evidence? Have we missed something? But if again those indicators are also low, then it kind of gives us a bit of a sense that this person is perhaps not the best communicator. Remember, all this is at the pre-interview stage. So this is in our process what we call the pre-committee. right? So when we receive an application, so this is before we actually physically meet the person.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's clear. And I mean, I know on IESE's site that you're looking for strength in both the quantitative and verbal parts of the exam. Do you have for example, like a percentile that you're looking for, maybe like 70% or 80%?
No, we don't really have any cutoffs, okay? And again, the percentiles, each year it gets higher and higher, so I don't want to give a number. What I can tell you is that the average GMAT is around the 690 mark at the moment, okay? But again, that's an average. Now, the problem with giving such a number, publicly on record in a podcast is that many of the listeners will interpret that if I get 690 or above, I should be accepted to the program. And the reverse as well, that if I have far lower than that, I have no chance at all. That's absolutely not the case. I want to make this crystal clear, okay? So the average is an average, and it doesn't really make that much sense for the particular individual. So what we want is for that individual to actually present his or her full profile to us. And the GMAT, again, like we go back to the first point, is just one more data point, okay? So let's say you've had poor academics in your university, okay? And you want to strengthen your application. Okay, the GMAT is an opportunity for you. So if you have a high GMAT, it can compensate for the lack of, poor academics early on. So these are the kind of things that we would pay attention to.
Yeah, no, that's crystal clear. And how do you feel about retakes? Like, let's say, for example, I score a 650. That's below your average. I think I maybe can get 30 or 40 points better at most. Is it worth taking again? Because, man, that GMAT is tough to study for. It takes a lot of time.
Yes, it takes a lot of time, and it's an expensive affair, right? Absolutely. So somebody who's taking the GMAT, it's, of course, that person's decision whether they want to retake or not. But if a person is retaking the GMAT, I think they have to be fairly confident that it's going to be a far higher score that they will get. Okay, so they really feel that they have performed poorly on this particular occasion. Okay, from an admissions committee point of view, we are actually neutral to how many retakes you take. We actually use your best score. Okay, so in that sense, if you want to retake and you really feel you can go higher, do that. But remember, it's the weightage of the GMAT in the overall decision is actually tiny. Okay, once you are at the interview stage, what counts is really who you are, what's your personality, why do you want to come to IESE Business School? Have you met with some real people rather than just surf the web and you think that you know the school? Because it's about a big decision in your life. It's a turning point in your life. So if you just pay a lot of emphasis to the GMAT and forget the rest of the things, I think you've really got it lopsided.
Yeah. And as someone who builds, connections with companies in Southeast Asia and South Asia, are these companies that recruit MBAs, are they concerned about GMAT scores?
Very good question. So I graduated back in 2003. That puts me back 14 years since I graduated. Okay. Nobody has asked me the GMAT score ever again. Okay. So I am in touch with a lot of companies. In fact, we have the big career event coming up next week. And none of the companies really are looking at the GMAT at this stage. Once you're inside a top school, they're looking at you as a candidate because they know that you've got the fundamentals correct. Having said that, sometimes a few consulting companies pay attention to the GMAT. Okay, so if you have a stellar GMAT like in the high 700s or a very low GMAT, then it can work either in your favor or against you. But really, these are extreme situations. So I can say with a lot of confidence that the GMAT, besides the entry to the MBA program, is really not something that anyone in life looks at.
Yeah.
And this is something that you should be reminded of.
Yeah. Yes. And how does IESE look upon the GRE? Because the format is different than the GMAT.
Right. Correct. Yes. The format is different, but the objectives are similar. Okay. So we are again looking at a universal test that we can compare students with. So we started accepting the GMAT a few years ago.
The GRE.
And
the GRE.
GRE. The GRE a few years ago. The GMAT, we've been doing this right from its origins, more or less. And there's not really much of a difference in the way we evaluate. However, what we have to do is we've got to do a comparison now internally between the GMAT and the GRE. And there are many also, I would say, online sources available to the public to see how the GRE compares with the GMAT. So again, you've got to be in the same kind of percentile. We are still looking for, evidence on the quants and the verbals, and all these are also factored in the GRE. So I would leave that to the candidate wherever they feel more comfortable for if they're considering IESE. We are indifferent to whether you've taken the GRE or the GMAT, but the process to evaluate the candidature remains exactly the same.
Do you look at applicants from different nationalities differently when it comes to the GMAT?
Yes. So we know there are certain countries who have a slight advantage when they take the GMAT. So those who are native English-speaking countries, for example, it's obvious they have a slight advantage here. So, for example, and there are certain countries who are also spend a lot of time preparing for the GMAT. Remember, the GMAT is another test. And like any test, if you prepare well, if you understand the mechanics behind the test, you're likely to get a higher score. So we have seen in countries like India, China, and a few other, particularly Asian countries, they are excellent at GMAT test taking. Okay, but that does not necessarily mean that they are fantastic MBA candidates for IESE Business School. Okay, so when we compare a Brazilian with someone from India, for example, we do know that getting a 700 in India and getting a 650 in Brazil are not the same thing. Okay. So we do pay those, we do that comparison with that particular target group.
I think we've just about covered all my questions. Any last advice maybe that you give to applicants about the GMAT?
Yeah, I would say, give it your best shot, but don't break your head over it. And pay more attention to really understanding why you're choosing the school you're looking at and really reaching out to real people out there. Don't just limit yourself to the internet or just focus on retaking the GMAT again and again, because those are not the factors that will finally decide the decision in your favor or not. Okay. So I wish everyone the best with their GMAT, but again, look at life beyond the GMAT.
Absolutely. And when you say get in touch with real people, does that include IESE, for example?
Absolutely. So we have a network of people. The information, the contact is available on the website, iese.edu. And you can reach out to us. We are more than happy to have personal meetings with you as well to counsel you on your application, to give you feedback on your profile. And we encourage that quite a lot.
Great. Thank you so much, Anjan. Always a pleasure. When 3 MBAs struggled with student loans, they knew there had to be a better way, so they created one. Now, CommonBond is a leading student lender, saving members up to $13,000 on MBA loans. Learn more at commonbond.co/touchmba. That's CommonBond Lending LLC, NMLS number 1175900. And let's get to our last guest, Gary Lowe, who's the head of admissions for the HKUST MBA program, one of the top programs in Asia, top 20 in the world. Let's see how that program looks at the GMAT. All right, Gary, thank you so much for your precious time and joining us on the Touch MBA podcast.
Welcome. Glad to be here.
On your site, you say that we do not have a minimum GMAT score requirement. Your typical range is 580 to 710. You are looking for satisfactory GMAT and GRE scores. And I know, in the past, your average has maybe hovered around 670, 680, around there. If I'm reading that and I'm an applicant and you say you don't have a minimum score requirement, should I apply if I score below that 580 range? I'm putting you on the spot right away.
Right. Great question, Darren. So, okay, that 580 to 710 is more our mid-range. So we're kind of taking out the top end, kind of low 25% in that sense. So, yeah, there are cases we do take students who are below 580, but obviously they do have something unique to offer to the class because I think as a very international program in Asia, diversity is what we cherish the most. So obviously GMAT is one thing that we consider, but like let's say if you come from like a very unique background, very special place, a very special industry, or even work that could add value to the learning experience to the whole program, obviously that could make up to part of that kind of GMAT thing. But I would say like maybe to be fair, the absolute minimum from a school level point of view would be 500. So if you're anything in between 500 to 580, then hopefully you have something pretty unique to offer.
No, I appreciate that because I used to be an admissions director myself, and I know like answering these questions is really tough because you truly are looking at like so many different parts of an applicant's profile. So it's impossible to say, oh, our absolute minimum is this or that. But of course, you can understand that's what applicants want to hear. They want hard numbers, right? Okay, in terms of your total score, like, are you looking, for example, for a minimum in terms of the quant section, the verbal section, the AWA, the IR, or are you more concerned about like the total, GMAT score?
Right. Interestingly, like according to one of the recent APAC conference that I went to, which was held by GMAT, they actually asked us the same question. And I would say like referring to like some of the US schools that I know, actually they do look quite deep into some of the breakdowns of the scores. But honestly, for our case, like we have a smaller class size, we do have a lot of emphasis in terms of the diversity, like cultural piece, the communication piece and everything. So for us, it's more like a total score. So obviously we do get people with a better quant score. We do get people like who get a better score like outside of quant. We're looking into that kind of diversified strength and kind of contribution anyway. So for us, usually we pretty much look into the total score. And I would say one thing that makes us different is because we have such a international class, in a sense, like 95% are international students representing nearly 30 nationalities. It's really hard for us to kind of do an apple-to-apple comparison, to be honest. So we're looking for that kind of really that diversity, that mix, that vibe, that kind of culture, as versus like some of the other programs, which maybe you have a little bit more local students. I do understand why they kind of look deep into the GMAT, because that might be, I don't know, in some cases, the key differentiator between this student and that student. But for our case, again, because of that international mix, it tends to be pretty different for us.
Yeah, I mean, would it be fair to say that, a corollary of that diversity component is like some GMAT takers from some countries have higher averages than from other countries? So
yes,
is that
definitely
factored in, right? I mean, unfortunately, for example, Indian applicants, super talented, super competitive pool, but high average GMAT score versus, say, an applicant from Nepal or an applicant from Mongolia, or maybe a place that doesn't have such a high average. Is that factored in to?
Yep, totally. I think you totally got it, Darren. And I would say one thing is, again, we are looking for that diversity in terms of like cultural background and that kind of global exposure every year. So that's kind of constant in our program. So if we are able to kind of aim for that, we hope to aim for like maybe the top, let's say 10, 20% of the students within that region. So obviously it would be adjusting according to the average GMAT in certain areas, which, yeah, in general, we do see higher GMAT scores like in China and India in general. But like at the same time, sometimes we find some candidates, I don't know, maybe back in Latin America, some other regions, they might come with a slightly lower GMAT. I don't know, maybe they're not so attuned to that exam system or anything. But again, they have a lot of other things to offer. So obviously, we do cherish that input a lot as well.
No, that's really great. And what about career goals? Because back when I was working in Singapore for my business school, if a non-consultant wanted to get into, say, management consulting and applied with a 630 GMAT, we might be a little bit skeptical because, not having come from that background, some of the top elite consulting firms were using GMAT as a screen. This was maybe 10 years ago. But I was wondering if that's a concern for you. I mean, I know so many of your graduates, over 30% go into finance, obviously very quant heavy stuff, and consulting. So does that do career goals kind of affect GMAT scores and how they're interpreted?
Yeah, in a way, but I think in particular that would be more like when it comes to consulting, as you mentioned, because you also understand like for some of the consulting firms, they do look into GMAT like quite heavily when they kind of consider a candidate. So for us, again, we're not looking for a particular background. What we're looking for is that diversified background, right? So I think for any candidate coming in, more what we want to learn about is like the overall story. So let's say, okay, if they come in with a 620, for example, they have a great background and they tell us, okay, I'm interested in working at like MBB, like here in Hong Kong or in Asia. We usually just have like more a conversation in the interview. So learning about what they want to do, and at the same time, hopefully acting as like partially an advisor or consultant just to kind of provide some perspectives about Asia and Hong Kong, because we might have a better picture about the employment scene here. So after, we would be letting them know, okay, actually for these companies, they might be looking for like a certain GMAT score and might be looking for like a certain background or whatever. So we would, again, try to get some of their feedback as well. And sometimes they kind of be like, okay, if that's the reality, actually, this is my backup plan. So I think it's more like a mutual conversation, just trying to or about like what they want to achieve, and also sharing like what we understand about the program, what we have to offer. Because what we believe is this is certainly like a win-win relationship. We want to make sure that whatever they are trying to take out of the program is something we have to offer, and what they have to offer is something what the program is looking for. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And what about the IR section? Is that important for consulting firms too? Like how, because it's such a new addition, right, to the GMAT. And I'm wondering how you guys use it.
That's interesting, because it's kind of like a new information. And I think even for some of the consulting firms, they are finding it a little bit kind of hard to see how they could evaluate the correlation, like for the IR score as versus the tendency of being a successful consultant in the firm. So again, from a school point of view, our focus is more like the total score. We understand you might score higher in one section, lower in the other section. But again, when it all comes together, it kind of pretty much hedges each other in terms of strength within the whole class. So not a big concern for us in terms of like individual section scores.
Yep, great. And I have to ask you about GMAT retakes. Always I find a dilemma with, especially with applicants who maybe score below your average, but within your range. So let's say they're at, 630 or 640. So they're a little bit below your average. And maybe they can get a 670 if they study, hard for another month, or maybe a 680. Like, how do you sort of advise candidates? What's your advice there in terms of whether, because obviously it takes so much effort to prepare for these tests.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And trust me, like Darren, I'm also an alumni of the program, so I've gone through the same process. I do understand how painful that could get. So my advice is, again, if you kind of have a certain score, you want to be competitive, like comparing to candidates with your similar background, because as I mentioned, like at least for the program at HKUST, we are looking for diversity. So the only thing that is constant is we want to have a well diversified like representation of different industries, cultural backgrounds, and also functions as well. So let's say if you happen to be a candidate who comes from India, okay, now I score like, I don't know, 680 or 720. You're not sure how competitive that is. One channel to kind of go through it is obviously you could talk to some of our alumni, get some perspectives, and also you could always arrange a consultation session with some of our staff as well. So you go to our website, actually get to register that. And I think through some of those conversations, we would be able to kind of give you an indication, like based on your region, for your current GMAT score, do we feel like you are kind of competitive enough? Okay. So it kind of depends on the case. And of course, again, what we're looking into is that kind of overall profile. So let's say if I feel like I'm very strong on the other parts, like my working experience, my background, some of the projects that I worked on, and yeah, I don't have as much time doing my GMAT. So that might also be like a valid case. So you just want to kind of make sure. So sometimes we look into this is, let's say if you're a basketball player, right? So GMAT is just one thing. It might be representing your shooting skills, for example. So yeah, you're a sharp three-point shooter. Wonderful, okay? But if you're not so sharp in terms of shooting 3 points, are you a great dunker? Are you a great rebounder? Are you a great assist person? Those are also things we want to look into, because obviously we're building a team with a very well-rounded kind of skill set.
Well, I'm so glad you used that analogy, because I'm a basketball fan myself, huge basketball fan.
Same here.
And yeah, I mean, I kind of look at it like MBA admissions is, I have this thing I call it like the Shaq principle. Like Shaq, obviously one of the greatest centers ever. He could barely shoot a free throw, but he made up for it by being so dominating and contributing in every other facet of the game, right? And so I think that's kind of one way to look at the GMAT. But I think that's great that HKUST offers that consultation, and I advise all our listeners to take advantage of that. I'll link to ways you can get in touch with HKUST because not all top business schools do that. One last question for you, Gary. GMAT versus the GRE. I think for a long time, GMAT has been kind of the dominant standardized test used by most top business schools. And I'm guessing that a lot more business schools want to take the GRE now because, it's just opening up like applicant pools and more applicants. And I was wondering, do you prefer the GMAT over the GRE? I noted on your website that you guys did make a note that, GMAT scores are kind of an indication of applicants focused on business school programs. So would you prefer to see that?
Well, honestly, I don't feel like we have like a keen preference in terms of like GMAT versus GRE. But one thing is that like even if you get a GRE score, we would be trying to convert that score into like the GMAT comparison that they have like on the website, because again, we still need to have one standard metric to kind of try to compare across all the candidates, especially when we have such a well-versed kind of diversified pool of candidates. So, but again, it really depends on like which exam you feel like suits you better in a sense, because I think they have a little bit different in terms of focus. But it's kind of like back to what I mentioned, like even within GMAT, we don't have a particular requirement as like versus for individual sections. We do believe like the exam does represent some part of your skill set and something that you could offer to the program, but we also understand this is not everything, right? So same thing, like GMAT, GRE, it is also like a reference point in terms of like indicating maybe how successful you will be like in academics in the class. So again, both exams are proven, both exams are very well known. So I think we take both of them. But again, just if you're applying for that and you have a GRE score and you have no idea like how I should be comparing with the class, which is predominantly using GMAT, then try to kind of convert that back to the GMAT score. And again, we would use that as a reference.
Great. Yeah, I'll link to that tool that converts your GRE score to your GMAT score. I mean, I think that it's kind of interesting because GRE is cheaper. It doesn't have that IR section. I was doing my research, of course, before this call because it's been a while since I've looked at both tests, and I was like, oh man, they're cheaper, and it's kind of a slightly less intimidating exam. It seems, at least, on the surface. So I'm wondering if they're going to win some market share from GMAC and GMAT. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think they're doing pretty well.
Yeah. They're being quite smart about how they do it.
Darren, if I could, I would just kind of quickly add to a few things, because I think one question you mentioned before was about like retaking the GMAT.
Yes. Which
might be one of the questions that I saw like during your email. From our point of view, because we also kind of get some questions from our candidates, like if I just retook my GMAT, would that kind of make my case less attractive or whatever? So for our case, we only look into the highest GMAT score, and honestly, that's what we record on the system. So even like no matter you took it 3 times, 5 times, 1 times, we just look at the highest GMAT score, and we have like no discrimination against the person who took more exams. So again, back to the point that you want to feel like overall you have a good profile to offer. So depending on like what you have to offer, like besides the GMAT, if you feel like it's not as competitive, then you might want to take a few more attempts to kind of improve on the GMAT potentially. And I would say one final thing is, I do understand a lot of candidates have like a lot of concerns in terms of like, is my GMAT score competitive enough? I would say HKUST comparing to other, I would say like global top 20 programs, I guess, again, comparatively, we might have a less focus in terms of like really the GMAT score. Like again, GMAT score is a great indicator, but for us, because like we have that international mix, we have a smaller class size, and we really focus on the learning experience So one key thing that we kind of took so much effort in terms of trying to recruit people all around the world is because we feel like this is a very unique experience that could offer you not only from like an MBA, a career transformation point of view, but also at a personal level. We want to make this like more a transformational experience, immersive experience for everyone. So I would say, again, if you feel like your GMAT score is not as competitive, as long as you have something very unique to offer, you feel like coming to the class, we will find you to be an interesting person, a keen contributor, which kind of matches with our vibe of being young, innovative, energetic, and you feel like you have a lot of energy, you want to be part of the program as versus just in the program. Still, I would say you never know. If we kind of find those qualities, a lot of times we find like some people in the class, maybe with a lower GMAT score, but they happen to be like our best contributors to the program. Just because, again, we have a smaller class size, we're a young program, so we're really cherishing that kind of contribution by every single individual.
Absolutely. That's crystal clear. So again, yeah, thank you for those last insights, Gary.
Mm-hmm.
There you have it, folks. That was a long episode on the GMAT, but I really believe that if you listen to the whole thing, you'll have a much better understanding of how top schools use your GMAT score. I want to thank my three guests, Son Nguyen from Michigan Ross, Anjaney Borwankar from IESE MBA in Spain, and Gary Lowe from the HKUST MBA program in Hong Kong, for coming on the show and for being so honest with their insights. I also wanted to draw a couple of conclusions for you guys. I mean, even though, as you can see, each school uses the score differently, I think they would all agree on the following points. So in terms of giving yourself the best shot of admissions with your GMAT, there's a couple principles. One, you want to score within the school range, right? So if the school lists that range, target to score, at least at the average and hopefully above the average, but if not, definitely within the school range. Number two, you want to try to score higher than your peers from your country, right? Because as you heard, many times schools are looking at how you stack up next to your fellow countrymen and countrywomen. So definitely want to score on the higher side there. Three, if you're looking to work for a top management consulting firm, you might be more concerned about your GMAT score and definitely want to target a 700 plus score, as those management consulting firms might be looking at your GMAT. And number four, you want to use different sections of the GMAT to give evidence or to give signals of your competence in that area. So if you have very little quant background educationally or in your work, let's say you didn't take many quant courses in college, you were a quote unquote poet, then you really want to focus on that quant section. Make sure you give admissions committees a signal that you are strong, when it's going to come down to those hard finance, hard accounting, hard stats courses that you'll take during your MBA. Conversely, if you're an engineer and you have a lot of quant background in college and in your work, then you want to probably focus on the verbal and AWA sections to really show that you can read and communicate and write effectively. So yeah, give admissions committees evidence that will make it easier for them to accept you. And number five, and I think this is really important, remember that while the GMAT score is important, it's evaluated in the context of that MBA program's goals and that MBA program's admissions philosophy. So it's more important to be aligned with those two things than to have the best GMAT score in the world. So yeah, those are my 5 conclusions after doing these interviews. I hope you found them helpful. And for those of you diehard fans still listening to this GMAT episode, at minute 50 or whatever it is, please leave us a iTunes review if you can. If this podcast episode has helped you, please leave us a positive review. I really appreciate them. They help more people like you find the show, and they give myself and our team a lot more encouragement to keep going. So yeah, leave us an iTunes review, and we'll see you next week. Cheers, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Touch MBA podcast. Don't be shy. We have a mailing list. Go to touchmba.com and get yourself signed up. And we'll keep you posted with the best tips and insider interviews on how to get into your number one school. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook at Touch MBA. See you soon.